Today, we're going to share with you an analysis of test score results from NAEP for Kentucky, the National Assessment of Education Progress, as well as the Kentucky School Report Cards. And we will be releasing the new 2022 Groundswell profiles for each school district in the state. You are going to see declines in Kentucky's education outcomes. And it's important to note that these declines started before COVID. However, it is also important to note that all states and all countries were hit hard by COVID. It's a new world and we are not alone. Because COVID had a disproportionate impact on those with fewer resources, Kentucky was likely hit harder than other states, and our losses likely could have been worse. We should acknowledge the strength in our systems that kept us from outright free fall and meet our declines in the rankings with resolve to work smarter and harder together and without division. At this time, I'll turn the meeting over to Susan Perkins-Weston, Senior Fellow for the Prichard Committee, to present the data. If you have questions along the way, please type them into the chat, and our goal is to allow for approximately 15 minutes for Q&A after Susan presents. Susan?
Good morning, everyone. I'm talking to you from Danville, and I'm going to get our slides up and do the extra step to move us to slideshow. So do we have good visibility now? It's what it ought to be. All right. Good morning, everyone. Let's take a look. I'm going to try the first part of the bad news first, to be honest about it and to let us move to the bigger thinking about how we move forward and drilling down a little further. So starting with bad news, taking a look at National Assessment of Education Progress, which is often called the nation's report card. Every state in the nation and Puerto Rico and DC and the defense schools participate and have a sample of students take their assessments in 4th and 8th grade for reading and math. I hope we'll see science results again soon, but reading and math we have. And these came out last Monday, and they're ouchy. NAEP is scored on a 0 to 500 scale score basis. And this is the kind of chart people are showing all over the country, so I did it with scale scores this time. In 4th grade reading, we spent years scoring above the nation, and we're back to tied with the nation. In each of these charts, I'm showing you 2003 to 2022. I've highlighted the scores at beginning and end, and then I've got a dark green, best Kentucky did. And what you can see is our scores for this year are lower than 2003. And you can also see that we lost ground starting from the 2015 scores. So this isn't all COVID. There's something else we need to work on. There's some other way we need to add strength to our work. But that's the reading drop off. In math, similarly, we've got several years of drop off, though in 4th grade math, we haven't given back all of our gains from past years. So we've got growth, but we got loss and it hurts. In math, we weren't statistically significantly above the nation, but we were tied and with a faint lead that looked like we could keep going and pull ahead.
Dorothy from Wizard of Oz. And I told the daycare person, I said, if those get bothering her, just tell her she can take them off.
In reading, in 8th grade, another round of the same pattern. We grew, we did better than the nation, and then we have lost ground starting in 2013 with the biggest drop off in this COVID era. So we have a painful situation. When Prichard Committee started talking about top 20 by 2020, it was based on having seen us able to grow year over year, pulling further ahead of the nation. And that hasn't been what we've been doing recently, which is why it's time for a new level of energy and commitment. And finally, 8th grade math. And in 8th grade, math has always been our weakest subject. And yet again, we have slipped compared to our peak and slipped compared to where we were in 2003. So this is a steady run of drops, and they are in general worse than the nation's drop during the COVID period. So we shouldn't start out with, we can sugarcoat this. We should start out with, this is painful. And then we work with it because we're here to build things. So in the main points from this part of the data, what you can see, I'm going to turn off, I've got a thing blocking my pattern. Big patterns. We, all of us, the whole Commonwealth, were unable to move students upward from 2019 to 2022. Except in grade 4 math, we couldn't hold on to the gains we've made since 2003. And even in 2019 and 2017, we haven't been able to hold on to the full gains we had made in earlier years. This is really hard. And I'm for us taking care of each other while it's hard. So my slides are in a mood not to turn. So a couple of notes for this disrupted situation we're working with. First, I want to share our new image of the work we're doing, which is trying to start and build a full pathway of the education continuum that grows for everyone. So starting with early childhood, building up in K-12 learning, building further in higher education, building a larger life for all of us, in Ed Prichard's memorable phrase. With a clear note that if we build a larger life for this generation, the next generation starts out with more strength as they begin participating. And with the big idea, the way we build that is with a groundswell of public action in the broadest sense of who should be participating in creating the education system we want for our children. I want to emphasize a couple of points at my connection. Quick reminder of the big ambition we have for K-12 education. This is from the Rose decision in 1989. And it commits Kentucky, saying that our constitutional expectations will be met if we build a system that does these 7 things. I won't read them all to you, but I want to highlight 1 and 5. 1 for sufficient oral and written communication skills, and 5 for grounding in the arts. We have a big idea of what we're supposed to provide for our kids, along with understanding economic and political systems, understanding governmental processes, having the training to choose life work intelligently, having skills to compete. It's a very ambitious idea of what we're after. And that matters because the Kentucky State Assessment we're going to look at measures a fraction of that. It does not assess arts creation, performance, or understanding. Personal privilege, a shout out to Penny Christian, who's been working on arts creation and performance in band competitions the last 2 weeks. We don't test teamwork, communication, problem solving. And I want to highlight sustained research, that process where you pick sources and you evaluate them and you synthesize what you're reading and you build understanding from that. We're not testing for that. We're doing the things that fit in an hour or a 90-minute test that covers a lot of content. So today's evidence shows us part of our situation and not all. For those of you who came to push that point, I wanted to make it early. Second thing, our definition of proficiency is an ambitious definition. It's not easy. It's not something where if people followed the directions, they could just make it happen. Our definition of proficiency on our tests, we set it in 2012. We based it on the Council on Post-Secondary's analysis of how many graduates were college ready. It wasn't based on, we already know how to get all kids there. We know a state that's already done it. We know experts who have a demonstration project, none of that. We've estimated what would equip students for future success. It's ambitious, and reaching it will take innovation and investment in hard work. So again, what we're going to look at tells us something about the work required and doesn't tell us everything. Next thing, this is everybody's business. It's our responsibility, whether we work in schools or investing ourselves another way, whether we're raising kids now or not, whether we hold elected office or not, whether we pay big tax bills or little ones or something in between. This is a challenge for all of us. So anybody who wants to say the parents didn't, or the schools didn't, or the taxpayers didn't, or the legislators didn't, it's probably all right, but pointing fingers isn't relevant. This is for all of us, and we'll get it done for our kids when we do it together. Fourth thing, we just went through a horrendous disruption, right? COVID knocked kids out of classrooms for many months. Students and educators and families have done impressive work, and it has been hard. And I don't think it's over, because some of us are sick and struggling with after effects. When you see me sipping my Coke, it's to keep the crackling out of my voice, because I'm not quite done with my case of COVID. Some of us are grieving because we've had a lot of losses. Lots of us are handling changes in how we work or how our homes work or our relationships. And lots of us are bracing for this winter to be tough again. So this evidence shows us some things about the work ahead as the disruptions continue. And finally, got to talk a little bit about sharing. All of us inherited a world that was built to privilege some of us and disadvantage others. It wasn't designed for all of us to flourish. I think we're all here because we want to create communities that are much better than that, and we also don't know all the steps it'll take. So when we look at specific student groups in this data, the point is to think about what we must all transform, all of us, in order to create a situation where all of our next generation can flourish too. So this shows us some things about the path to a larger life for all of us. And when I drill down to the disaggregated data, I want to be clear it's so that we can think, what else do we have to change, or what else do we have to learn how to change in order to make it work for everybody? That's my pitch for treating each other well and doing the work together. All right, now I can move to Kentucky school assessment results, the big school report card that came out closer to 2 weeks ago. For any of you who want to see your own schools, that's at kyschoolreportcard.com. And when I use the detailed data, if you want to do comparisons, if you scroll to the very bottom of the page, there's a blue bar with a link that says data sets. And that lets you download more spreadsheets than any one person can stand. And the state of my computer files is insane at the moment because I've been collecting them. But here's a first chance for me to share what we're seeing in the assessments for elementary school students. And looking at percent proficient, we start with fewer than half of our kids reach proficiency on any of the assessments. That's our truth. And then the follow-up is this works differently for different groups. So for English learners, less than a quarter, below 25% got there. And that is consistently through all these charts. I use the middle purple for below 50 and the dark purple for below 25. And there's a light purple only for if they're above 50. Nobody got above 75%. So this is a chance to get a sort of a pattern and to pick out easily English learners and students with disabilities were with remarkable consistency below 25% proficient. And changing that is part of how we change the situation for all students, is to move those kids up an important step. On this chart, the only group with better results than that 50% are the non-disadvantaged students, the students who don't qualify for free and reduced meals. That's about a third of our kids whose families can give them a little more economic support. That's the only group that broke the 50% mark. I'm going to show you 5 more of these, but I'm going to show them faster because it gets boring unless you're sitting down and developing your own questions. So in middle school, continuing the pattern of every group is below 50%. English learners, worst off, students with disabilities, next worst off in terms of what we figured out how to do for them. And science showing up here as the weakest of the 5 subjects being tested. And that's a thing to be aware of because we're sure that science is really important to the skills for the future economy. And again, students who are economically disadvantaged are the ones best served by the ways we know how to do things. We have to find things that work like that for more kids. High school, it could almost get monotonous to see we're still every subject below 50%. English learners, worst off, students with disabilities, next worst off. A little pop of something work Female students got to 50% proficient in reading in this group. I included gender on all of these. Kentucky test scores don't show big gaps compared to others, big gaps by gender until we get to the very end of the data. And then to show the same thing, looking at race, the group that we, all of us together, are serving least well are African-American students. And that's just what the numbers show. Asian students are able to break 50. They're the only group that can do that. And it's painful, but that's a truth we need to look at because we're supposed to build ourselves into adults who can do better for the kids. Middle school, same pattern, strength for Asian students. High school, same pattern with the beginning of also seeing Hispanic or Latino students in some subjects be below that 25 mark. So those are the big patterns we're seeing in this year's data. We're aiming for proficiency, and all of us working together equipped fewer than half of our kids with proficiency, with extra low numbers of kids proficient in science and extra low numbers of kids moved to proficiency for African-American students, English learners, and students with disabilities. And this tells us big work ahead. It's work we're going to do facing underinvestment and COVID disruptions and tough history. So that's the big ouch. This slideshow was designed for us to send it out to all of you so that you can ask questions as we go, and I can also go back to them when we move into questions, but that's the big ouch. From the school report card, I do want to equip you with awareness of two other kinds of changes. This is, again, it's still kyschoolreportcard.com. First, about the dashboards. In Equity Coalition meetings, we've talked several times about this requirement from Senate Bill 158, which was a 2020 bill that said, let's change accountability again, and said, we're going to use a set of indicators, assessment scores, a climate and safety survey, English learner progress, and then for high schools, post-secondary readiness and graduation. And we're going to color code performance levels from very low to very high on each indicator. And then said, starting this fall, we're going to do accountability with an online display we're going to call a dashboard that'll have all of those performance levels color-coded and shown by district, school, and subgroups. And I've been fascinated about what that was going to look like, and now we have seen it. So I went to, when it opened up as a site early in the morning on the 18th, I went looking, and I always look at the elementary school my kids went to first, just because my questions are better when I'm looking at a place I know well. And what you see when you log into the school is a very small bit of a dashboard showing you the school's overall level, and Tolliver came in low on its overall score. But you look at that and you think, where are the indicators? Where are the groups? So I added an orange signpost to show you where the link is that'll take you to more. And if you click on accountability data, you see a more detailed view by the 4 indicators. And again, if you love Tolliver Elementary, this is unusually painful. There's a distribution across the state on all these scores. There are schools that scored very high. So this is a painful thing to see a school I care about, but then you get to work. And here I'm still thinking, where are the groups? So second orange signpost, and if you click on the Explore Data link, you get to see a link for the reading math indicator, which is called the proficiency indicator as well. And at the bottom of that section, you can see how a set of groups did. So you can see that white students had scores like a medium school, Hispanic and Latino students had scores like a low school, African-American students had scores that counted as very low. You'll also notice here, you're not seeing some of the groups that I've already talked about. So you're not seeing students who are not economically disadvantaged. You're not seeing students who are not English learners. You're not seeing students who do not have identified disabilities. But that's the set of things you can see if you've clicked through 2 links. And then over on the left is the menu where you can see the other indicators. And if you click there, you can see 3 more dashboards to show you those 3 indicators. That probably lends itself to some kinds of displays you might want to show in a public meeting to let people get a sense of where your school stands. I find it bewildering because I can't compare numbers and there's a lot of scrolling back and forth. So I took a shot at a redundant version of seeing these numbers more efficiently, which is showing you statewide elementary results like this, so that you can see across elementary schools, the results for all students came out in that middle medium level. That's not surprising because superintendents set the cut scores for this, and they were aiming for the largest group in the middle is counted as medium, with low and high and very low and very high off to the edges. In this version, you can pick out pretty quickly that students with disabilities and English learners and economically disadvantaged students are in the low group, are scored as a, well, they had a score that would put a school in low. With the weird exception, the school climate and safety survey results are something new. I haven't had a chance to study them in detail, but you can see that those don't break students out completely, and they do show students with disabilities seeing something better about the school climate than other kids do. That's an interesting, quirky thing, and you can see which groups aren't shown here. When you move to middle school, the student groups we're supporting least well are easier to spot as we start seeing the very low red. We're still seeing the safety and climate survey showing a little better results for, and I think really from, the students with disabilities. And when you move to high school, you've got the same thing, but with post-secondary readiness and graduation added. So you can find this for your own school by going through the school report card and checking the dashboards. But this is the range of how it looks for our kids. And we can move over and see the same thing looking by race and see quite similar patterns. With the quirky thing in school safe climate and safety, African-American kids reporting the lowest scores, white students reporting the highest scores. That's a little bit of ice water in my blood, but I'm supposed to face it. That's how that looks to our elementary students. And Asian students doing a little better than the other groups. What we're doing seems to work for them, with us again, including their families and including their neighborhoods and everyone else. Middle school, same thing. High school, same thing. These are our big patterns. So in the biggest patterns, climate and safety adds concern about African-American students, but doesn't do that for students with disabilities or English learners, which is an interesting thing to think about how we're working together. And post-secondary readiness and graduation, which we hadn't looked at before, so this is the new thing, also add concerns about students with disabilities and English learners and African-American students. And the weaknesses in our work are harder to see when the report doesn't show us the results for the groups that are often the best served. So I think that's a weakness in the school report card, although it's not horrendous. I do have a bright spot for you. I sent Bridget an email the night the school report card came out, and what it said at the top was OMG crosstabs. Now, for those of you, and I just decided I'm just going to say that because I was so pleased to see them. The department is now releasing files that let us look at more complex student groups where we think about 2 features of who the students are to think about how we're serving them. And I brought you 2 examples of what those files make possible. To deal with a question I've had forever, and then to deal with an issue that's debated in our politics all the time. So the first one is there's a classic thing that says, we don't have a race problem, it's just poverty. Now, there are about 9 things that are nutty about that, I think, in terms of how wealth got distributed. But there's an attempt to say we don't need to confront the racial issues because really, if we just address poverty, we're addressing it. The chart in purple and blue looks to me like it's a rebuttal of that claim, because it shows that when you look at kids at 2 different income levels, you don't see the racial difference disappear. On the contrary, what you see is that in our schools, African-American students whose families are able to give them some economic comfort and security score like white students whose families don't have that. That's a way of saying we got two issues we have to work on as a society, not one. And we shouldn't try to avoid either one by talking about the other one. And that is important to me. The puzzle I've had for a long time has been looking at Latino students' results and thinking about what role is played by the fact that many of them are English learners. So the orange and yellow chart, I think, is a little more positive in suggesting that when we do a good job of helping students move from being English learners to having become English speakers, we can add some strength for our Latino students. So those results are quite similar. English learners who are white and English learners who are Latino have similar scores. Latino students aren't matching white students. We haven't gotten them to full parity, but they're fairly close together. I learned a long time ago that 5 points was where I started breathing again, because it's not okay, but it stopped being catastrophically awful and become more like routine work. I want to show you one more thing from the crosstabs because I didn't show graduation in detail before. So here, to make you love crosstabs, you can see gender, race, and economic disadvantage all in a set. So the first colored column shows you how all students are doing on graduation by race, and you can also see the subgroups across the top. You see almost immediately that female students are doing better on this than male students. And these are split at 5-point breaks because they're all closer together. You can see that there's greater weakness for African-American students. You can see reason for concern for Latino students and a bit of concern for students of 2 or more races. And then I wanted to point out something anomalous and odd to you, which is that for American Indian, Alaska Native students and for Hispanic or Latino students, the not disadvantaged group has the higher graduation rates. I put orange notes there. So for male American Indian, Alaska Native students, the group with the disadvantage has a graduation rate of 91.7. The group without is at 80% graduation. For female students, same things are upside down. If you're economically disadvantaged, according to our ratings, you're doing better. I think that's strange. I think it's a wonderful thing for communities and folks who have been working with kids with those backgrounds to share what they think it might be. My first thought was economic disadvantage means receiving the free and reduced price meals. And it might be a terrible communication gap in who we let know that they're eligible and who we serve in that program. So it might be the most struggling kids don't get the meals. That's the most I could come up with, but it's a question I'll put out in the discussion for folks to think about whether they have ideas about why that's true. But it may be a clue that helps us up our game and serve those kids better if we can understand how that works. And now, tools. Some of you will have seen our community profiles. We've upgraded them to Groundswell profiles, and they're available now on the Prichard Committee website. And these are designed as tools for you to use in starting conversations in your communities. So it's a tool for conversation. It's a beginning overview of how education is working in a district that includes 10 indicators of progress from preschool enrollment to degree attainment, indicators of different impact for different student groups, some indicators of community well-being, and a brief display of some school district resources. And you could download them now. You can download them after the meeting. We set this up to be a tool for community use. There are 10 indicators. I've given you a visual of what it looks like, but it's hard to squint at. But the indicators are preschool enrollment, kindergarten readiness, reading and math proficiency in grade 3 and again in grade 8, post-secondary readiness, graduation rate, college going rate, and post-secondary attainment. And for all of those, you can see how your district is doing and get an idea of what the numbers mean to start with by comparing to the statewide numbers. On the next page, we do give you a look at 7 of those indicators for the whole set of student groups we've been talking about. For smaller districts, especially, some of the groups will not be shown. And there is, for a few of you who have wrestled with me on the puzzle of years of kindergarten readiness looking better than 3rd grade proficiency and what's happening to different groups, that isn't as true this time. So something in the most recently reported kindergarten readiness has changed. We're listing fewer students as ready. And then on the back page, 2 sets of indicators about where your community is. We've got data on health, wealth, population, and participation. And then we've got some district data on enrollment and experience and expenditures. I do want to flag a bright spot for our state. In the 2020 election, we had 61.7% of our voting age population participating in the election. Now that's based on dividing voters by the full census, but it puts us 15th in the country, which is way better than we were before. So in the middle of, we haven't done all the big things we want to do, we did a big thing in 2020 in terms of voter participation, and I think having made that easier through the various ways we made voting simpler for folks. And at the bottom of this, we have an invitation to work with family-friendly certified schools and with nearby Groundswell actions with links and email to let you connect with that work. What we're here to ask you to do and promote everyone doing is get your profile along with the study guide and review it. And that can be alone, with friends, with a civic group, at a special event you create. Review the evidence in a way that makes sense to you, and then use it to plan new questions and new action to build up learning in your community. And if you jump in on that, we hope you'll share with us about how it's going. We've set up a super easy email access for that. So you can write to groundswell@prichardcommittee.org. And what we encourage everyone to do is dig in those ways and innovate and collaborate and build us a groundswell. That's all, except my heart needed one more thing when I was working on these numbers. So I bring you pretty much my favorite poem in the whole world with its ending, which is Maya Angelou closing out saying, "Here on the pulse of this new day, you may have the grace to look up and out and into your sister's eyes and into your brother's face, your country, and say simply, very simply with hope, good morning." And that's where I think we need to be. We woke up this morning to bad numbers, but we're going to take care of each other and work together to make this better. And that's my set of presentation. I'm going to move to where I can see the chat. But if someone has picked out another question to share with me, that would be extra great.
Yep, Susan, I'll pick it up from here and ask the questions that we have in the chat. Thank you so much. That was incredible information. Susan has been spending her weekend finalizing that presentation as we, the rest of the Prichard Committee staff, were hosting our annual meeting last Friday. So hats off to Susan for making this happen for today. So first question from Bren Martin in Greenup County. How can we ensure resources are available, best used, and dedicated to goals for innovation, investment, sustained hard work, especially with high teacher turnover?
Yowza. Yeah, that's the whole ball of wax, Bren. You've got it. I think the crucial thing is to dig in and show up. And then you're looking at, are your local school leaders paying attention? Are they sharing with you? Can you find out where you could show up to actually work with some kids? Can you promote the right investments? And that's going to vary a little bit because every school system is trying. And they got something that works and something they're trying to make work and something they haven't tried. And choosing between, let me help with what isn't working yet, or I think there's another path. That's the innovation and collaboration thing. I am very interested in the rising dialogue about ways we're teaching reading. There probably are some methodological things that would be good for every district to be sure they're doing good stuff on phonics and sure they're doing good stuff on phonemic awareness. After that, I think it's a local puzzle. So I have ideas, but I don't know that they'd be right for folks in Greenup County.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, Bren, I think, one thing we've called for since the federal dollars were infused into each and every one of our school districts is that local community members ask their school districts the plans for the use of those dollars to stem the tide on learning loss and to innovate and collaborate for kind of a stronger education foundation going forward. So I think if you can ask those questions in your local district, each and every one of you, to better understand what your district, your school board's strategic plan for learning recovery is, that will help further the conversation statewide. Okay, Susan, next question from the Center for Gifted Studies at Western Kentucky University. Has there been any significant change in the makeup of the student population statewide in the past decade?
We have important growth in Latino students. We have a smaller bump in the number of students who qualify for free and reduced price meals. And I haven't looked at the other ones to know. The Latino growth is changing lots of our communities. It's a kind of wealth we didn't have before. But that's the only one I'm sure of, other than we've been edging upward from 55% closer to 65% free and reduced price meals.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Susan. And then a question from Denise Stewart at Learning Grove in Northern Kentucky. Many disparities begin in the preschool years. Will Kentucky begin disaggregating data on preschool children? We've not been able to gather that information.
I have not seen much, and some of that's because there aren't good ways to measure quite where they are other than that they're participating. What I have seen is when the department publishes the kindergarten readiness results, they at least give you an idea of who's been in what setting as part of that, so that you can see whose primary setting was childcare, who was in state preschool, who was in Head Start. That's about it. And you can see that by race, and you can see that by income, and you can see that by students who have disabilities that have already been identified. But that's a pretty thin piece. And then working out which things to ask for, which will help us help the people doing the direct work without wearing the people doing the direct work out, is a big challenge. It is startling to go from how much information is available in K-12 down to the smaller information and the greater difficulty in finding it when we move back to early childhood. But the only data I know about with confidence is if you download the K-screen scoring, it also gives you some idea of where kids were the year before they started kindergarten. That's about the only data source I know to rely on.
Great question, Denise, and a flag for our Strong Start Coalition to work on getting that data for future years. So thank you for that question. April Redden, Pendleton County and professor at Northern Kentucky University, asks, our K through 8 students are offered a variety of enrichment courses, music, art, PE, library. Perhaps it's time to include hands-on laboratory science and computer technology classes to those enrichment options. What do you think about that, Susan?
I think those are necessary subjects. I hope our regular science classes are doing hands-on lab stuff. That's certainly the expectation. That's certainly what's called for in our standards. We also have computer science standards, although we don't have a test for those. All of that needs to happen. As I hear more from teachers about what the testing does and doesn't help them do, and as I learn more about just the limits of creating tests where you can be confident what the scores mean, when you're dealing with something really complex, like an arts performance, it's kind of tough to come up with a machine scored anything, and kind of tough to imagine getting perfect reliability out of any of it. So looking for other ways to be really clear that those are valued and part of what we provide for every student, I think is pretty important. I don't know anything other than sustained community dialogue to say, what are we doing and how's it working for those things? For science, if it's happening, it's probably happening for most or all kids, and worth checking that it's all. For the arts, lots of places have robust programs, but they aren't for all. And that's another thing to ask about. My kids got the most fantastic speech and forensics program in the universe when they were at Danville High School. And that was great, but it wasn't for all. So I always had this sort of ambivalence between the huge gratitude and the concern that the support wasn't big enough and the other opportunities for performance also weren't big enough
Yeah,
to
great.
really strengthen all students.
Thank you, Susan. We really can't overemphasize the importance of your voices in your local school districts. So we hope you will take this information today and ask constructive questions locally with a sense of hope and positivity. Go ahead.
That reminds me of my hope and positivity comment on 10 communities hold on to programs and excellences that aren't on the test. And I have a one-word proof that communities can do that. And the one word is basketball. Right? Basketball has not been wiped out by any form of school accountability we've had. The communities value it, so it survives. And if enough of us show up for the other things we want for our kids, those can be robust, even if they're not on the state test too.
Great. Okay, the next question in the chat box, I'm going to go through in order, folks. I know a couple people have their hands up. I'm going to get the questions in the chat box as they've posted first. And want to reference Judith Bradley with Jack B. Nimble has added some additional analysis for students with disabilities. So check out her comments there. Beth Jones with the Greater Clark Foundation. Where do you access these dashboards for individual schools?
Okay.
Not the report cards.
The data itself, so the files, you go to the kyschoolreportcard.com page, and if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, there's a little blue menu bar, and the first link there is data sets, and there are lots of them. Most of the crosstab information is in the accountability section of that collection of files.
Okay, great. Thank you, Susan.
Susanna, would you put my email into the chat box? I can't get there without distracting myself. And anybody who wants help finding the stuff, you can also email me. And I'll make sure we get you right there.
Okay, great. Next question, Susan, from Mary Gwen Wheeler. What are the measures for post-secondary readiness? Is it no longer college and career readiness? That's a great question.
I have not fully rebooted my understanding of those. I'm pretty sure from looking at how it's displayed that it is both college readiness on ACT and some testing on career readiness and some intensity on the dual credit and dual enrollment courses and AP scores and international baccalaureate scores. So it's
Hey, Susan,
yes.
it's Penny. Having been in the room when we talked about this and did these cut scores, as far as post-secondary readiness, they're pulling away from quote unquote college and career readiness, and that post-secondary is more along the lines of pathways, pathway opportunities, certification testing, and passing, and whatever opportunities there are that are made available. Of course, you have some of these smaller counties that have, ATCs, these career tech centers. Excuse me. Then you have, like Fayette County has some schools that has pathways, but not true academies. So it's designed to see opportunity, access, and whether or not certification is happening past that that 2-year program opportunity.
The voice of authority. Thank you, Penny.
Great. Thank you, Penny. It's always good to have folks in the room where the decisions are made, right? All right. Next question from Jana Bryant. Are you able to provide a chart around the English language learners population growth and highlight where in Kentucky this growth is happening?
I am able, although I haven't done it. Yes, that is a classic, and having heard multiple questions, I think that's a really interesting thing to think about putting in another round, at least on the Ed blog. And maybe if I'm going to do this presentation again, a little addition to orient people further. In the On the back page of the profiles, we provide the basic percentages to let people see some of that, but we haven't included growth. And I think that's a really interesting thing, and having multiple people say so encourages me to boost that up higher on my list of things to work on and help people share. And adding which districts have the biggest growth would also add a sense of information for folks to feel our state becoming a little bit different place in some ways that I think are going to be enriching and informative for all of us.
Susan, and one of the other things that we did personally with our data is we actually looked at in that population what was the percent that was making the 0.5 progression of learning for the year versus not. So it was just as simple as, are you making your progression that is recommended if you're an EL learner? And so we probably cross-reference that with access scores.
That is access the basis for the state reporting of progress? I bet it is. That's the state, the nationally used assessment of English learner progress.
I see Skip giving thumbs up there.
Good, okay, that's what we want to hear.
It's the state proficiency test. Yeah. English proficiency.
Okay, we can always put a little group together around this topic if folks are interested. Skip and Jana, I know you both are very much interested in this topic, so. Okay, good. Okay, jumping to the next question, Judith Bradley with Jack B. Nimble. Why is it that given the negative progression over grades in reading proficiency for certain groups, i.e. students with disabilities and some racial groups, what explains the jump in CCR and graduation rates? It's a puzzle that comes out every time we share the profile, Judith, and it's the right question to ask.
Right. I think there are a couple things. One is graduation is importantly a showing of persistence and exertion, which has some value. It's kids who have shown up and put in work over those years, and that's part of what we're showing. Post-secondary readiness may be a more accessible opportunity to show what you can do. Since all of the tests, they're not quite pencil and paper, they're heavily computerized, but they're kind of intense on a certain set of skills to access them, even if some kids are having accommodations as they take the test. Whereas, it may be that the post-secondary readiness and the graduation are closer to open to students whose learning process works differently. It may also be that they're inflated a bit, that we start giving out soft, reassuring information that overstates where we've taken the kids in those pieces. But I wouldn't assume it's all bogus. Because if you move to a career pathway where you can actually produce something using your skills in ways that work for you, maybe that's actually closer to true than some of what we get on the assessments. On the other hand, we set out with IDEA to make our schools work for all students. And these numbers are really firm that that is not what we are doing. And we should own that.
Susan, I'd like to just reemphasize what you said earlier about graduation rates being a representation of showing up and effort. That's something that we find throughout education system, is that report cards, grades, which equal graduation often, a good chunk of that isn't just how you do on a test in that class, but are you showing up and are you participating in a variety of ways? And so yeah, there could be conversation about what's the best metric for graduation, but it has historically included that, which is also an important indicator of how well people do other things. So.
Thank you, Grace. Okay, I'm going to move on to a question from Elizabeth Mays in Louisville. Following the recent Career Journal article on the lack of teaching through a scientific approach to reading at the college level and in the classroom, does Prichard see getting involved to advocate around this issue? Now, Elizabeth, this has been an issue for us for for the last few years, if not longer. And we worked intentionally with Representative Tipton and Senator West to pass the Read to Succeed bill, which was Senate Bill 9 in the last session. It passed, and it included $22 million that is going directly to the Department of Education. They have set up Kentucky Reading Academies. And I can't tell you how many teachers have already applied for those academies, but they are coaching around the science of literacy with the intent of doing so for the next few years to better prepare teachers to teach along that scientific method that's come out.
Yeah, I think
Susan, you want to say any more there?
I have read the Courier Journal articles through once and have made a PDF of the whole thing to try to advance my own literacy by being able to flip back and forth easily and pull the parts together. From other people I rely on, including the Prichard Committee's Lois Weinberg, the core argument there, both for phonics and for phonemic awareness, needing a more structured and systematic approach, looks awfully convincing to me. Building that up, and I am also really pleased because the letters program appears to have intensity and sustained work. I can't tell from the description how much back and forth teachers can have working through it in their own practice. But it looks like the depth of investment it takes for each person to get confident. It's going to be a big piece, and our scores do not show that what we have been doing has been adding to our strength and our kids' strength year after year. So I think we should be ready for some important upgrades in what we do. I'm going to say something out loud that is unpleasant. I spent a long time trying to reason through the levels of exclusion from classrooms that show up in our school discipline data and how wildly disproportionate they are by race. When I was reading that articles, and then I went and talked to Marty Polio, and he said he was concerned about some of RTI also causing kids to leave the classroom, and whether that ran down kids' confidence just by itself, particularly if you had lots of also in-school suspensions going on. So when I read about RTI as the kid leaves the classroom again, it made me extra sad. I'm sure there are schools that find ways that it feels affirming and connected and not a loss of community and connection. But I looked at RTI and thought, it removes a struggling kid from the classroom, and maybe that's its appeal. That reading recovery may have gotten more boost than it should have because it was a way of not having the kid who was struggling the most in a classroom where the teacher could see an opportunity for the other kids. And that, if that's part of why it's been so popular.
You better preach that, Susan Weston. Don't be afraid to say it. Straight up fact.
I'm trying to limit how often my inner Jeremiah comes out, Penny. It comes through.
Nah.
But that, yeah, and Penny is the other person who lit a fire under me when I was struggling with that data. And I think that piece of what the Courier Journal article said to me most is we need to transform. We don't need to transform because some schools may already be there. We need to have strength on a consistent way available to every kid on phonemic awareness and phonics across the whole system, and it needs some structure and it needs some deep investment. I believe there are some kids who flourish with balanced literacy. It's not all kids, and we need to be worried about that and try to build a system where every kid gets onto that on-ramp and can keep going. And
So we will continue to follow the reading issue, Elizabeth, and all. And this is because of the passage of the Read to Succeed bill with the $22 million behind it. That's why Prichard at our annual meeting recognized Representative Tipton and Senator West for their 4+ year commitment to working on this issue. And we'll continue to follow it and puzzle through it and make sure that investment proves out, and hope those of you who are really interested in that issue will join us in that. Next question from April Redden in Northern Kentucky. Many more families are opting for private religious affiliated K-12 homeschooling or transferring to online academies. Because these trends are impacting the population of students being tested, is it logical to deduct it's also impacting our results?
it is certainly possible that some of that transition happens. I don't have good numbers for that. I regulate the Digest of Education Statistics with a couple of year lag, posts estimates of how many kids are in non-public school learning situations. But they won't have data yet on what that's looked like over the last couple of years. April, if you have anything like numbers, that would help. But in principle, the possibility that the best leveraged parents who were in the best position to give their kids other supports also gave them the support of deciding to change schools is out there, and it could affect some of our numbers. I don't think it can be very big because private and parochial schools don't have a lot of spare desks. They can grow a little, they can't grow massively. Same as my endless puzzle about where charter schools are going to get buildings. That does happen, it does matter. I don't see how it becomes huge because it takes really deep infrastructure building to pull it off.
Okay, folks, we are at 3 minutes before the close of the hour. I see a couple more questions in the chat that we'll be sure to respond to via email. And I see good discussion in the chat regarding the reading piece and letters training. So thank you to all of you who are engaging in that conversation. As Susan asked at the end of her presentation, we really hope you will use the profiles to have a conversation locally in your community, whether it's 3 moms at a coffee shop or, dads at the soccer game or your Rotary Club, whatever it might be. We hope you will use that profile to spark a conversation locally and then begin to act locally to help improve these results that you saw today. This is not a time for despair. It is a time for us to come together at the state and local level to meet the future of education with a richer vision for what it can be for the next generation of learners and leaders in our state. This means rich approaches to teaching and learning, and some of you have asked about that in the chat. It means different approaches to assessing student progress, to ensuring support for students, from high quality early learning environments that meet both a young learner and their working parents' needs, to personalized learning rich in content and skill development in the K-12 years, working toward a more meaningful high school diploma that has some market value, and ensuring all students transition to successful post-high school pathways where they will earn a family-sustaining wage and have the opportunity to build wealth. That is exactly what we mean by a path to a larger life. And we can't do that here as a very small team in the Prichard Committee office without each one of you in your communities. So we hope you'll take what you learned today and further it locally, and then also help us get smarter as your staff team here in Lexington as we continue to analyze results and develop messaging around them. So all in together. Susan, thank you for the Maya Angelou quote. I think we are transitioning from, with hope, good morning, soon to be good afternoon, and on we go.
That we do.
Susan, any final last words?
That's the main point. Thank you, Bridget.
Yeah, great. All right, thanks everyone. Be in touch, please, by email. And I think the next Equity Coalition meeting's on your calendar. We'll make sure to keep you in the loop on that agenda and any more data briefings we have for the balance of this year. Thank you all and have a great week.